Welcome y'all to another edition of Miss O'Leary's History Flash. We will be preparing for our next experimental exercise when you come to class next. We'll be talking about the United States Constitution. The first Constitution we'll be talking about is the Articles of Confederation.
Say what?
Yes, the United States had two constitutions. You heard me right. You probably only thought that we had one, as that's the one you hear about all the time. But our U.S. Constitution was written in 1787, and as we just learned, the year 1776 was the Revolutionary War of Independence. So that 11-year period, we were run under the Articles of Confederation. You see, starting a new government was tough for the colonies, because much like going back to an old abusive relationship, the colonists were afraid to give their power away for fear the government would end up being like their old king and not listen to them. They just fought in a war, risked their lives for freedom from that kind of treatment, and were worried that creating too strict of a government would just open that door again. Unfortunately, this led the nation to a shaky start, as the Articles of Confederation were no more effective at binding the states into a nation than a rope in the sand. Colonies. Before the war even ended, states were fighting with one another, mainly about taxes and boundaries. Can you blame them? They had just dealt with and fought for their freedom from taxation without representation, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The government found relief for the disputes of people randomly claiming land by setting up townships. But this only created more problems. How would they be governed? Are they colonies or states? Thus began the Northwest Ordinance, which divided the Northwest Territory into smaller territories, each with their own appointed governor. When the territory had 5,000 free adult males, it could elect its own lawmaking body. When it reached 60,000 males, it could apply to Congress to become a state. This also included a list of rights for the settlers, and over time, the U.S. continued to establish territories to the Pacific Ocean and beyond. Money was another issue. Issue was that the paper money printed by Congress during the war was worthless, and they didn't have any silver or gold to mint coins. States began printing their own money, which made it so no one knew the worth of the different currencies. This was especially hard on the farmers who could not pay their debts or taxes. In Massachusetts, a judge ordered the farmers to sell off their land and livestock to pay their debts. No one was happy about this.
But Daniel Shays and the farmers of western Massachusetts didn't agree. They were indeed concerning themselves with a second rebellion. They had tried the way of conventions, petitions, and letters to their elected leaders. They had tried to seek justice legally, and they had been ignored.
They viewed lawyers and they viewed judges in the same way as they viewed the Eastern politicians. These were men out to suck their blood.
Shays still had no way to pay his debts to the businessmen of eastern Massachusetts, and was faced with the threat of imprisonment, crushing poverty, and the loss of his farm. To feed his family, he had been forced to sell his most cherished belonging, the sword he had received from the Marquis de Lafayette. Fortunately, Daniel Shays still had one sword left, the cutlass he had carried in the Battle of Bunker Hill. And now he sharpened it again in preparation for a new battle. In the late fall of 1786, Daniel Shays began to muster and train an army. Among them were many of the men he had fought with in the Revolution.
The Massachusetts veterans of the Revolution who joined Shays' rebellion put the hemlock in their hat when they went off to war to fight against British tyranny. I mean, it was symbolic. This is the new tyranny that they're fighting against.
The poor and oppressed of Massachusetts had desperately needed a leader. Now they had one, Daniel Shays.
Daniel Shays led his followers to shut down courthouses and seize weapons from the Continental Army in what's now known as Shays' Rebellion. This made it so Congress was unable to stop them. It appeared that no one had respect for this federal government, which prompted Congress into calling a constitutional convention to revisit the Articles of Confederation. When you come to class next, we'll be revisiting the Articles of Confederation and attempting to compromise on the issues at hand.